Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson, and I want to thank you so much for joining me for the very first episode of this new project I'm embarking on. And since this is the very first episode, I wanted to take a minute here at the top of the show to let you know a little bit about what we're going to be doing and what we hope to achieve. I am a journalist. I write about books and movies and television shows and comic books and all that stuff, and I've been doing it for way too long, probably 16, 17 years at this point. And in all that time, horror has always been my favorite thing to write about. It's what I read for pleasure, what I watch for pleasure. When I write fiction, which I do more and more these days, it's what I write. And I am particularly fascinated by one aspect of horror fandom more than any other, and that is how our horror DNA as fans comes together. What are the pieces of horror literature, horror cinema, horror television, any weird little thing we find that somehow burrows down really deep in us and stays in our brains and makes us love this stuff forever? And I'm particularly interested in that question when it comes to people who create horror. What are the horror stories that form the imagination of a great horror writer, a great horror filmmaker? So that's what this podcast is going to be about. We're going to, in every episode, bring on a guest who is a horror creator of some kind, and we're going to talk to them about a particular story that shaped them, that made them into the creator they are now. And that can be a book, a short story, a comic book, a TV commercial, a movie. I don't care, as long as it is horror and as long as I can access it so I can experience it along with them. Because what we're going to do each week is try to dig down deep into these particular formative, foundational horror stories and figure out exactly what makes them tick and what made them shape the creators that we're going to be talking to. So, if that sounds like fun, and I really hope it does because it sounds like a blast to me, stick around. Our first guest this week is a best-selling horror author with a lot to say about one of the greatest independent horror films of all time and one of the best horror films of the 21st century. So, without further ado, let's go to our interview with the great Clay McLeod Chapman. Our first ever guest on The Scares That Shaped Us is someone I've wanted to interview about his work for quite some time. He is the author of books like What Kind of Mother, Ghost Eaters, and Whisper Down the Lane. He is the author of plays, comic books, screenplays, podcasts. He is a horror host thanks to Fearmongers. He is the hardest working man in horror. Clay McLeod Chapman, welcome to the show.
That's some James Brown right there, right?
Listen, I have seen you run at full speed through airport bookstores because you were so excited about seeing something there.
Oh my God.
So I would not be surprised if you could do the full-on James Brown act and we come out and put a cape on you and then you throw it off and keep going.
Oh my God.
I'm sure you could do it.
Has someone ever done that? Like the James Brown Dracula kind of like get on the fire, get with like a vampire, like a red and black cape?
I mean, if it hasn't, it has to. Someone has to do it. Like I feel like in terms of like performance connected with horror authors, it's either you or Grady Hendrix has to make that happen.
I will happily defer to Mr. Hendrix if he wants to. I mean, he is by far the busiest, the hardest working author in horror biz, but I will gladly be his opening act.
All right, so anyone wants to supply Clay with a Dracula cape, go ahead and get working on that, start stitching, and we'll see how we do. Before we get to your chosen scary story that you wanted to talk about, I did want to ask you, your next release in a few weeks now is a novella called Kill Your Darling, which I was lucky enough to read an advance copy of. Special thanks to Doug Morano at Bad Hand Books.
And you're
And it
still
is,
talking to me? You're still wanting to do the interview?
I was about to say, it's another book that ripped my fucking heart out of my chest that has your name on the front. So, um, for the listeners at home, could you just give a brief little tease of what they can expect from Kill Your Darling?
Oh man. Wow, you're putting me on the spot. Okay, I should have known this. I should have prepared. Okay. Kill Your Darling is about a uh, married couple in their 70s, late 70s. 40 years ago, their 15-year-old son was murdered, brutally murdered. And to this day, nobody knows who did it. Small Virginia town, there's kind of whispers and suspicions, but nobody knows, and nobody was ever arrested, and nobody was ever tried in the court of law for the death of their son. But Glenn, this man, he has been doggedly pursuing the truth for years, decades, and never gets closer. And it's kind of put his wife in a real kind of spot. And so, out of a fit of frustration, she signs him up for a creative writing workshop at the local library. And she's like, you've been looking for the truth for so long, but you just can't get the end, like you can't find a conclusion to this. There's no ending to this. So take this goddamn writing workshop and make one for yourself. Like find the end. And he begrudgingly, he goes through with it and ends up doing just that, like writing his own version of what happened to his son. And it rocks the boat in this small town. And like, I don't know, things get a little tough for our little Glenn, our dear Glenn. But yeah, it's when I think it's like my memento, my adaptation, my uh what is that? Did you ever see Dead Man's Shoes?
No.
Have you ever heard of Dead Man's Shoes? It's this amazing, it's Patty. Oh my God, am I going to be able to pronounce his last name? Patty Constantine?
Considine,
Patty,
yeah.
yeah, Constantine. Uh, oh God, I'm probably murdering all of the details, so I'm failing. But he definitely starred in it. I want to say that he wrote it or co-wrote it. Didn't direct it, I don't think. But you gotta see it. You gotta see it. It's
I
so
just
good.
I just wrote it down. I will check
Oh
it
my
out.
God. Please,
Um,
please, please.
so I wanted to ask you about Kill Your Darling. You were just in the New York Times about your novelette, Stay on the Line, which is listed in there in the context of you being one of our great writers of grief horror. And Kill Your Darling is, I say this with every new thing you put out. I'm like, oh, it's the most devastating thing he's ever written. But Kill Your Darling is, it opens with one of the most brutal death scenes I can remember. And then yeah, it's like you said, it's like Memento. It is this man processing all of this information that he has compiled over 4 decades of grieving his son. And then it meshes with a writing workshop that really smacks true of kind of how writing workshops work and how what people will tell you and the platitudes that you can either take or leave. So I don't want to give too much away, but I do want to ask you, how did the writing workshop element become a part of this book? Because it's a really interesting way to couch Glenn's story.
It's funny because I mean, I've taught a lot of writing workshops. I've been really fortunate. I teach at a writing program here in the city, and but for the longest time, for years, we don't do it anymore. But I went I went to Sarah Lawrence College, and after I graduated, um, there was a there's a the Sarah Lawrence, and I think probably like every college has a version of this. But there was like a summer writing intensive where either faculty or guest artists would spend, like a week or however much time kind of at on campus working with people, workshopping their material. And one of my first kind of post collegiate, post, graduate gigs was teaching at this writing program at Sarah Lawrence. And it was wild because it was a pretty big mix of age range. And, you would have some like early 20s, maybe, but like the kind of median was always like 40s, maybe 50s. But there was this one year we had this one guy who came in. This is embarrassing. I can't even remember his name. Let's just say it was like Kenneth. And Kenneth, like he was in his 70s. He was a really kind of like reserved, kind of, dare we say, conservative individual, like he was not an artistic spirit, but he just wanted to tell his story. And it was about him. It was his life, everything. And like the kind of duration of like the materials that he would bring in, there was, this is going to sound awful, but like there was no structure to it. There was no, like, it was just raw data. It was like, here is my life. There was no narrative thrust, like all of the mechanics of what we say in writing 101, there just wasn't that. And so we as the instructors would have to kind of like navigate the conversation with him of like, oh, like, this part right here is really interesting. And maybe we could kind of like focus on that and kind of bring that up to the surface. And he'd be like, no, that's not how it happened. This is how it happened. This is me. And like his kind of like the kind of stubborn doggedness of it, I just found really admirable. Like it was just kind of like, here's a guy who like, it's so mean and so cruel, but like this stuff is never going to get published. This was never destined to be put on the bookshelf. But like for him, the ability to kind of write his life and put it on the page was that's what he wanted. That's what he was here to do. And this is I was a kid. Like I was in I think it was like 25 when I was like supposed to be, like I was younger than the majority of people that I was like leading in my writing workshop. And like I just remember being so flummoxed by like trying to like work with him because he just like, it was just like, no. And then like when anyone else would give him feedback, I'd be like, no, that's not how it, like, that like he just dug in. And that, you know, is endemic to a lot of writing workshops where people will be like, no, that's not what I want. And like, I don't know, there was just something so, I want to say beautiful about that idea of like, what is it to write like tell your story? And he was so doggedly pursuing the truth, the historical account of his life, that I just remembered that. I remembered that for years. And I'm rambling, forgive me. But years and years later, there was this newspaper article. I read this article in the Times about a man who had a son who was murdered and nobody knew what happened, or like no one had ever been kind of arrested or tried for, convicted in the death of this man's child. And like he just, like he was like, the whole story, it was like almost like a kind of personal interest story where it's just like, yep, here's this guy, he's like a quirky, he's like our town's like he just, like all he does is like call up the sheriff's office every day and says, anything new today? And I just was just so kind of fascinated by that idea of like, here's a person who is not getting any closure. There's just no closure. And like years will go by, and this man who's being interviewed by the Times is suddenly just like, I have no closure. There's just nothing. And I just took this, like these two gentlemen who I read about one and kind of encountered another in a writing workshop. And I was just like, well, what would be closure for a man 20 years, 30 years, 40 years after. And it was like, well, you have to make it. You have to make your own closure. And a like a an awful creative writing workshop might just be the catharsis, the thing that you need in order to get the closure that you're after. And yeah, it was just life just kind of like happens in and around you, and you just kind of pluck. I plucked.
It's interesting because I think a lot of your books, in dealing with grief, are about characters who are in one way or another trying to reclaim the narrative around their grief.
Hmm.
It's especially What Kind of Mother. It's a book about like trying to reshape the circumstance of your grief into something new.
Yeah.
And I just found it so interesting that you went at it from a more literal, like, I am a writer. I'm going to examine how a writer might reclaim their grief. And it's just a really interesting exercise in the way that you, again, I don't want to say too much, but the way that you use the platitudes of the writing workshop and the kind of goals that he is given to try to achieve within it, to help him shape this thing and eventually arrive at what I think is a really interesting conclusion.
Yeah. What does W.C. Fields say? Like never work with children and animals. I
Yep.
think I think there should be a author version of that where like writers should never write about writers. Like I think there's this like it's it's cheeky, forgive me, but I always feel like we all love Stephen King, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Yes.
And you know, there's like this moment of like, oh, Uncle Steve is writing about writers again. Like, you know, like there's that, that feeling of like, oh, we're here we go again. You know, it's that tried and true, like this is what we're talking about. And I always feel a little bit like I'll never write about writers writing. Like that just like that's like a little, I don't know if it's navel gazy, but it just feels too I just can't do it. But this is I'm eating my
Well,
words.
yeah, Glenn is an amateur writer. He's not published. So,
Mhm.
you can modify your rule and say that you still kept your rule.
Yeah. What
Uh
is it? Sheldon, who's Misery's protagonist?
Paul Sheldon, yeah.
Paul Sheldon. Yeah. Yeah. Glenn is no Paul Sheldon.
Well, Glenn is an amazing character, and Kill Your Darling is out September 24th from Bad Hand Books. I love it. You should read it, buy it, support a great small press like Bad Hand, and support Clay. But let's move on now. Speaking of grief and reclaiming stories and a few other things that I think are common threads in your work, you chose for this discussion of formative horror stories the 2001 independent horror movie Session 9, directed and
Yes.
co-written by Brad Anderson, one of the best horror films of the 21st century so far, I would say. And I
Yes.
think
Yes.
most people who've seen it probably agree. Um, so
Why? And so, but why is that? Like, why is this the best horror movie? One of the best horror movies of the 20th century.
Well, we're gonna get to that. I think we're gonna try. We're gonna try to drill down into how this works. But first, I wanted to ask you, because there are so many different ways of coming at what this book eventually, or book, what this movie eventually is.
Yeah.
Uh, and listeners, we are gonna spoil session one. It came session nine. Gosh, I'm
We're
all
gonna
over the
do
place.
all of them, all the
We're gonna
sessions,
do
one through
all the
nine. We're gonna
sessions, one through
spoil
nine.
every single one of them.
We might even spoil session 10, and I don't even think it's in the movie. So uh, if you haven't seen a 23-year-old film, what are you doing? Go find Session 9, watch it. It's incredible. But Clay, in your mind, if you were to give someone the elevator pitch of what Session 9 is, how would you put it?
A group of asbestos removal dudes have a gig at a decommissioned, de-sanctified mental institution. And they have a week to remove and clean out all of the asbestos from this massive, massive asylum in Massachusetts. The Danvers, what was it? The Danvers State Mental Hospital. And in that time, the further into the week that these five-ish gentlemen go, the more they lose their grip of reality. And whether that is because of something supernatural or something mental remains to be seen. But spooky, spooky things happen within this mental institution as time clicks on.
Yes.
Did I do it good? Was that
Yeah,
good? Was that
that was
close?
great. That was
Yeah.
great. That's a good starting point. And if you don't know, listeners, it is set very specifically at the Danvers State Mental Hospital because they shot it at the Danvers State. It is shot in an actual closed down mental institution with all of the refuse and weird graffiti and everything else, all natural to the location. And I think that's one of the things that makes it one of the best horror films of the century so
Mhm.
far, because you can't just pluck that kind of production value out of someone's mind. Like, it's just all there in its perfect crumbling atmosphere.
Yeah.
And it's a remarkable use of a single location. There are a couple of scenes where you see someone at a bar or you see someone outside a house, but for the most part, all 100 minutes of this movie take place on the grounds of this institution, and they make such good use of it. Um, and I don't know, there's just so many wonderful little touches. Obviously, there's a wheelchair that makes a big appearance on the poster, but there are so many other little touches of what it must have been like to live and work at this place. But then we get into my favorite part of session 9, which are the tapes that the
Yes.
movie is named for.
Yes.
Which is one of the guys, Mike, who is the sort of studious member of the group and reads books and thinks about wanting to be a lawyer. He goes down into the basement and finds these tapes. And thankfully, there's a tape player right there because convenience, we need that. And it's all in one location. You have everything you need. And he finds these 9 sessions from a patient named Mary Hobbs, who had multiple personalities, seemingly stemming from some traumatic event that happened to her when she was a girl. And he becomes obsessed with listening to everything that Mary Hobbs went through and all her various personalities coming through. So much so that he like begs off work and tells them, "Oh, something's broken. I have to go down and do the fuse box again," just so he can go listen to these tapes. And that is the first of many ingredients that start this film off on a weirdly ambiguous journey. Like you said, that it
Yeah.
could be an actual supernatural curse stemming from this woman, or it could be just everyone's going crazy because they're literally in a mental institution and all they can do is rip up tiles and throw stuff away and lose their minds.
Yeah. It's amazing because I feel like I watched it again just for this, and I what's phenomenal is just like all the narrative threads are kind of pushing along parallel to one another. And the film, it kind of nudges you to make some kind of assumptions. But at the end of the day, in a weird way, I feel like the film is not committing to completely telling you that like all of these things are interconnected. It really wants you to believe that, or really wants you to kind of make that assumption, but I feel like the film itself is just like, it's almost like you can kind of see the seams of each of these narrative threads, like Mike going down in the basement and listening to the recordings that just so happens to be happening at the same time as like Gordon, the kind of boss of the group, like kind of having his kind of like emotional mental descent at the same time as, you know, other characters are kind of having their kind of moments. And it's all interconnected in a way, but I feel like that interconnectivity is like loose in a weird way. Like it just feels looser, and I kind of appreciate that.
Yeah, there's this definite sense. It does a really good job in the first half of the movie giving you an idea. And there's a scene where Hank, who is the kind of smartass of the group, and he's been with the crew for a while, and he's showing a young kid, Jeff, who just started working for them. He's showing him the ropes, and he's telling him about asbestos getting in his lungs and basically trying to
Mhm.
scare him. And he tells him, like, look, this work will chew you up from the inside out. This is not stable work that you want to have the rest of your life. And he talks about each member of the crew in turn and says they all have an exit plan. You might not know it. You might not know exactly what they're going through or what they're thinking about, but they all have some way of getting out of all of this manual labor misery that we're doing here.
Mm-hmm.
And the movie does a great job of sort of showing you Gordon is clearly spiraling. He has a new baby at home. He has a wife. He tells the owner of the building at the beginning of the movie that he really needs this job. In fact, he shortens the deadline from 2 weeks to 1 week because he needs the bid that badly.
Yeah.
And then Phil and Hank have a rivalry over a woman that creates a certain tension between them. And Mike is always sort of drifting away from the group, and you sort of feel like he's becoming detached and untethered from them. And you're right, all of these threads might be connected, or they might just be a group of guys each going through something, and they don't necessarily want to share with each other exactly what they're going through.
Yeah.
And the movie invites you to hypothesize of like, okay, Phil's acting weird here. Maybe Phil is the guy that all this weird stuff is connected to. Or maybe it's a red herring, and maybe it's Jeff, the kid who doesn't do anything, or maybe it's Mike, or maybe it's Gordon, or maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just that it's really weird to have to work for a whole week in an abandoned mental hospital, and that's where we're headed with this.
Yeah. I wish I knew the name of the actual case, but Brad Anderson kind of has gone on record as saying that like the character of Gordon, his backstory, the stuff, I feel sheepish spoiling it, so I'll let you do that. But like that idea of like what happens to Gordon, what Gordon's kind of like moment in the movie is based on an actual murder case in Boston. That like this dude uh, essentially killed his family, and then kept going to work and just didn't say anything, didn't, just kind of pretended that like it was just business as usual. Life goes on. And meanwhile, back at home, the bodies, I guess, are, moldering, decomposing. But that foundational kind of narrative thread, it's pushing the movie along. But like that's the thing. Everything is just layered on top of each other in this kind of loose gravel bed of narrative. Like the fact that like the sessions, the recordings, and I feel like I want to get back to, you brought it up, and this is the movie. This is why I think the movie kind of like resonates, is that these recordings manifest something in the men, the workers. It definitely manifests something in me. And I think that like how far the movie is willing to go to kind of do the A to B, kind of connect the dots. It's not pulling a punch as much as it is just like it's like, well, maybe, you never know. And like I think I respect it, because I want it to feel like it's a conscious decision.
Well, the thing that's really interesting about that, and in the Mary Hobbs tapes, which Mike plays out for us, Mary speaks as several different people. There's a little girl called the Princess. There's a little boy named Billy. There's Mary herself, who doesn't really want to talk about any of these things. So the doctor conducting the interviews kind of has to go with the other personalities. And they keep trying to contact a personality named Simon. And you spend the whole film hearing about Simon, but not hearing from Simon. And it's all tied to something that happened in Lowell, Massachusetts when Mary was little. And finally, at the end of the film, in what is one of the best sequences of rising tension, I think, in the last 25 years of horror movie making, because again, all of these threads that we've been talking about, they're all happening at the same time. Gordon is doing something, Phil is doing something, Jeff is doing something. Mike is running to put gas in the generator so he can hear the end of the tape, which is amazing. And this tape is playing, and you finally hear from Simon, and you realize that Simon is the personality who drove Mary to kill her family one December night after her older brother injured her. by pushing her down on a porcelain doll and cutting her chest up. Um, and it all ties into this realization. And again, we're spoiling this. I'm going to spoil it. That Gordon, as was inspired by this real life case, I think the name, according to Wikipedia, the name is Richard Rosenthal. It's based on a real case where Gordon, who is the stressed out, sleep deprived leader of this crew, goes home after he gets the job to greet his wife in the kitchen and tell her, "Hey, I got this new job. There's a big bonus. We're going to be fine." She's cooking pasta. She accidentally spills the boiling pasta water on his leg. He freaks out and kills her, their newborn baby, and the dog. And then spends the rest of the film leaving messages at the house, calling the house, wanting to talk to his wife, because in his mind, he didn't kill his wife. All he did was hit his wife in a fit of pain and rage, and he feels horrible about it and wants to atone for it. And the thing that is amazing about these two things intersecting, Mary and Gordon, and their two stories of violence, that I find so amazing is you can't necessarily pin down a moment where this Simon being that maybe possessed Mary and told her to kill actually went into Gordon. The movie doesn't give you that. The movie never gives you this moment where you go, okay, so that's when the curse was unleashed, because it makes you think maybe the curse was unleashed into Mike because he's the one who opened the evidence box.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was Gordon because he went and sat by Mary's grave. But that happens after he killed.
Yeah.
We learn at the end that happens after he killed his family. So it's very much a kind of almost a Shining thing where, like, are there haunted places or are there haunted people? Or are there both?
Yeah. Well, the movie, and this is the hugest spoiler, the movie will say there are the weak and the wounded, which is, ultimately Simon's preferred modus operandi. Like having, like, who are the people that are, I guess, receptacles or vessels for possession, if you want to kind of go down that road and believe that that's what the movie is kind of purporting. But it's so, yeah, I mean, like I watched it last night with this kind of mind's eye towards like the catalyst, like finding the points where like you can see the trigger. And 7 minutes into the movie, and it's like they're touring the mental hospital for the first time. Like this is what, like, they're checking out the space to see if they can put in a bid and get it. It's in essence the job interview. But while they're touring the facility, uh uh Gordon hears a voice from down, like, whether it's in his head, whether it's down the hall, whether it's in the space, but he hears a voice that we come to learn is Simon.
Yeah.
And it says, "Hello, Gordon." And that's 7 minutes into the movie, and they haven't gotten the job. Ultimately, Gordon has not yet murdered his family. And it's like that moment is like okay, now a ball is rolling, if you want to believe it. Like, I think this
Yes.
movie is ambiguous to almost a fault. I really appreciate, I love this film so much, but like I get frustrated when I think of like the Gordon narrative through line, because like it's such a tough one. And if it was any other actor other than what is it, Peter Mullan,
Peter Mullen, yeah.
Mullen, I mean, god damn, he is acting the shit out of this role. And it's not even so much that he's not given much of a script. Like the lines are just not there. It's like him just like in a car staring out a window, and like you feel the weight, the exhaustion, the kind of like the tonnage of his heartache. And that's when he meets Gordon, and like, okay, so if you want to be a believer that this is a possession movie, like that's the moment that we're kind of off to the races. And like, you kind of learn this at a later point, but like, when the movie wants to tell you that he in fact murdered his wife, his child, his dog. uh there's the do it Gordon, which is the kind of like Simon's prompt to kind of like set him off, but that's all in flashback or dream or some kind of ethereal gauzy kind of like synapse between scenes. It's not even that the movie plays its cards close to its chest. I think it's very kind of open about what cards it has in its hand. It's just like it's not willing to like say it has a royal flush, or it doesn't like put the cards down. It just like makes you do, like you have to kind of like say, oh, you win.
Yeah, yeah. Like the thing that stuck out to me in the way that it does that was there's the scene where Mike finds the tapes.
Mhm.
And he finds the tapes because they're in a box marked evidence. And he is just curious what could be in a box marked evidence in this asylum. And he pulls the box down, puts it on the table, and starts to cut into it. And when he's cutting into it, everything slows down and this very grave, serious music plays. And there's a slow motion shot of his utility knife puncturing the tape on the box. And it's the movie is like telling you, like, this is really important.
Yeah.
This is the thing. And you get this moment of like, is the movie trying to signal to me that this is the thing that breaks everything wide open?
Yeah.
Or was it the voice that Gordon heard in the hallway? And there are a couple of moments, even in that opening sequence, where Phil sort of gets distracted and starts staring off into the distance.
Yeah.
And you wonder, like, did something happen to Phil? And then there's that moment, one of my favorite scenes, the first sort of, it's not a kill scene, but the first attack scene where Hank goes back at night because he found this cache of old coins and gold teeth and all this stuff that was left in a
That's
wall.
the crematorium.
It's
in
yeah,
the furnace.
it's just outside the morgue. There's this little brick that he pulls away and he finds his cache and he's like, well, someone should use this money, so I'm gonna go get it. And it is such a like, yeah, it's such an act of sort of sacrilege to the dead who suffered there. And the movie plants all these wonderful haunted house sort of things where the security guard tells them, like, oh, you know, some of the patients come back. This thing was closed 25 years ago, but some of the patients come back and we
Yeah.
don't really know why. And it's all hitting you at once. And I like your analogy of sort of loosely piled gravel because it does feel like you could dig into any one of these and find something, but it might not be the thing.
Yeah. You know, I almost want to call shenanigans on that moment. The kind of the slow motion kind of slicing of the evidence tape, you know, and then overlaying that with the like the slicing and accidental cutting of Gordon's finger,
Yeah.
you know, in a parallel scene, and the like the dust falling off of the tile and going into, was it Joe's eyes? Or like, you know, like they like you have these moments that are like, oh, here's where the supernatural entity is released into the wild. And like, and you're like, okay, like and I will say that is one of the most, if not the most overt moments of the entire film. And I would almost argue it's the most heavy-handed in the whole film.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is like, okay, here we go. This is really important. Like we're gonna slow everything down. Ominous music is playing, and like, you know, the box is opened and the evil is unleashed. And I I would, as an audience member, I'm pushing back against that moment and resisting. It's in the movie. It's clearly it's there because the filmmakers chose it to be there. But what I love about the majority of the film is how ambiguous it is. This is like
Yeah.
Paul Tremblay levels of ambiguity.
Oh, totally.
You know, you know, like I just feel like there's something in the water up there in Massachusetts where like they just can't give you a straight answer. God damn it. And it's just funny because uh when the movie presents itself as just a straight up supernatural movie, I lose interest. Like I kind of pull back. But it's when the movie is like, it could be. I don't know. What do you think? Well, I think this. Oh yeah? That's interesting because I thought this. And like that you could have, and this is wild. I'm 200 years old and I saw this movie when it came out
This is
in
what
the
I wanted to
theaters.
ask you about. I wanted to ask about your first experience with Session 9. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
I mean, I I've lived in New York for over 20 years now. And this movie came out in August of 2001. And uh when did it come out? It was, oh my God, it was like mid-August. Um
Yeah, August
and
10th. August 10th.
yeah. So I don't know. It's weird to kind of put it in this context, but it was playing at the Angelica Film Center, which is this amazing independent movie theater that's still, miraculously still around. And it played at the Angelica, which is on Houston Street. Um, and this was like a few weeks before September 11th. And you know, we didn't know it at the time, but this was like one of the last movies that I saw with my friends pre 9/11 in New York City. And like me and my roommates went, like I'm in my 20s, I've graduated from college. We're in New York City. We're uh, it was a group of like men and women, but we're like in our 20s. We're just like geeky kids who are not in college anymore in New York City going to see a horror movie on opening night, you know? And it was a box office bomb. Like the movie didn't perform well. I don't think we were like the only people in the theater, but like we kind of had the theater to ourselves. Um, and the Angelica is kind of notorious for like the subway is always running underneath your seat, so you can kind of hear the six train kind of like zipping by. But it's still like it's like a quintessential kind of New York independent theater experience.
Yeah, yeah.
I love it. I love it. And I saw Session 9 there, and I have the most vivid memories of us leaving the movie theater, and it was at night, and you're in Lower Manhattan, like in how like Houston is kind of like not Lower East Side, not Soho, not it's like it's kind of at an intersection of all these different kind of like neighborhoods or kind of nooks within Manhattan. But you're in the lower part of Manhattan. And I just remember vividly being out in the street after having watched this movie. And this movie rocked my world. I just like walking out of that theater was just like, God, what did we just watch? And I remember this one other friend of mine, his name is Carl. He was just like, I didn't like it. And I was just like, did we just watch the same movie? This movie like had a profound beat. I like the best cinema experiences I've had is where like you walk out of the theater and you haven't left the theater. You haven't like your body may be physically present on the street, but like you're still in the space that you watched the movie. And having watched session 9 and leaving the theater, leaving the Angelica and being on Houston Street, like about to get on the subway and just being at the intersection of like what I think it's like Broadway and Houston, and you're just looking at like the city with all of its lights. Like it was August and it was not hot, but it was just like a warm, it was just like a great kind of night in New York City. Like it just like quintessential New York nights for me as a geeky horror film fan in my early 20s. And then like 9/11 happened. And like that there's like this weird feeling of like how engaging culturally with New York just changed after that. Like that was the last kind of innocent, like I've been to a million movies since then, but like there's just a different like I'm no longer that kid anymore. Like there's like it's almost like a BCAD kind of like, particularly here in New York, where you just like you walk into these spaces in the city and you walk out of them, and it's just like a liminal kind of space. But New York changed after that, and you just don't go like I just don't have I mean, I still have those transformative experiences, but like there's just something different about it now. Like I don't know. Like I'm not gonna put like some weird profound kind of cherry on top of this, but like it just feel like things feel different. New York feels different, you know?
Well, you mentioned the movie Rocking Your World, and in thinking about your work, I personally like I could put a character like Hank smack dab in the middle of Ghost Eaters, and I feel like he would fit.
Yeah.
And obviously, like Ghost Eaters is also a book that's set in a lot of abandoned buildings and has that really sort of gritty, everything's falling apart aesthetic. Um, what Kind of Mother is a book with a lot of working class people in it that I feel like characters from this novel could have walked right into. Um, and I don't think you're as big on ambiguity as Paul Tremblay, but there's
Nobody
certainly
is this big into
nobody,
ambiguity. Like he's
nobody,
Paul's just he just lives in that world. Or does he? I don't know. Maybe he does.
maybe. Well, yeah, we can discuss the ambiguity of Paul Tremblay's life forever. He is a walking yeah, I'm gonna cut that part because I don't know where I was going with that thought.
Don't cut it. He is just a walking. What's it? What is he? I don't know.
What is he? What is he?
You know, he is what he is.
He is what he
We don't know.
is. Yeah. Anyway, I don't think you're as big on ambiguity as Paul, but I do think there is this level of I don't want to call it magical thinking because that's not quite it. But your books, they don't necessarily always make logical sense in the way that so many people want horror movies to make logical sense. Like you can't trace every line of the lore, you know?
Yeah.
What Kind of Mother in particular I'm thinking about, but
Yeah.
it makes sense emotionally in the context of what the characters are going through. There is this like psychosphere of emotion and grief and fear that makes everything make sense because it's true to the characters. And I feel
Could
like that is what Session 9 does.
could that just be? I just want to interject. Is it just because I'm a shitty writer? Like, is it
No,
like but like like in more capable hands, like it would intellectually make like what would Stephen Graham Jones do with like a What Kind of Mother or like a like I'm being cheeky, but like it is funny how yeah, like logically, holy shit. Like there's no like I don't even know what the fuck happens in What Kind of Mother. But emotionally, like you know, whether it makes sense or not, it in the heat of the moment of these characters, they are making decisions that feel uh while albeit not logical, like emotionally sound.
which is one of my favorite kinds of horror. Like this is what I was getting at. I One of the reasons I love your work is you are able to lean into that in a way that feels earnest and honest, and it's not it's not odd for the sake of being odd. It doesn't feel contrived. It feels like you are genuinely leaning into the emotional reality of these characters. And one of my biggest pet peeves in horror is when someone says, "Yeah, but that doesn't make any sense because why would the characters even do that?" And I'm like, "Man, Freddy Krueger doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
He's a dream demon. Like, when's the last time you ran into a dream demon? Let's
But but what are the rules, Matthew? What's the what are the what's I'm being cheeky here too, but it's like
Yes.
it's amazing how people want rules. They want you watch a video, you got 7 days. You know, like they want a system, they want a mechanism. And I want it as an audience member. And when I'm denied that in a Paul Tremblay world, like I get so angry, but I'm like paying attention. Like I'm like, ah, you know, and it like it makes you do the work, like you're doing the lift. Um, and it's so frustrating, but you lean into it more, you pay attention more, you engage with it more.
Yeah.
So
This is a thing I love. And look, I love a system too. I love that I know how to kill Dracula and I know how to kill a werewolf, at least a universal werewolf.
hmm,
But there is something so undeniably satisfying about sitting down for a film like this or a book like What Kind of Mother or Paul Tremblay's horror movie or any number of Paul's books, really, and trying to just sort of unpack it and realizing that it doesn't all fit together in this intricate Neil Stevenson web of lore and connected characters and things like that. And I really love that about Session 9. And it leads me to my next question, which is, what do you feel like you took from this movie that you're still unpacking and reckoning with in your own writing?
I steal from this movie liberally, liberally. Like, I'm worried that by being on this podcast, I'm going to have a cease and desist. Like, Brad Anderson's going to file a lawsuit against me because, like, I am copying Session 9 so much. Sometimes, like, overtly, and sometimes maybe a little more subtly, hopefully. Um, I mean, like, do we have 3 more hours? I could, like, I wrote a podcast. I co-wrote a podcast for Monkey Paw called Quiet Part Loud. And that was just, let's just, like, we even call, like, I called it, there's like, we have to have a Session 9 episode. So, like, there's like one episode that was just like our kind of like let's do all the cool things that Session 9 did. And like that was so much fun. Like, we like playing with the audio record, like doing the kind of fun things that, like, at the end of the day, if I had to pick like the thing that is so effective uh technically for Session 9, it is the audio design, the sound design.
Yeah.
Production design is Mother Nature reclaiming that building and sending it down into the ground. But like the filmmakers, the artists behind it made an amazing collage of audio horror. And when we were writing Quiet Part Loud, me and Mac, like, I don't know if I ever kind of copped to this to Mac, but like I was just like, I'm gonna, like, oh, let's have a record, like, let's have a boombox that plays like a cassette player recorder that can like play a session. And like it was just like we were just fucking copying we were doing, it was like our Session 10. I have a new comic series, like a creator-owned comic series coming out with Dark Horse, in starting in October, and it's called Seance in the Asylum, and it's a Victorian kind of like Civil War era, like, it's not contemporary by any stretch, but it's all about possessions taking place in a mental institution. And I think in the scripts that I wrote, it was like, the hospital is called the Danvers State Hospital. I was like, and like my editor finally was like, we actually have to change the name because that was a real place. And I was like, oh, like it was like, so it's like I'm just like, those are just off the top of my head. I am like there's just like, this is a well that I return to frequently. And it's because it has this amazing Poe construct of, is he crazy or is he not crazy? Did he murder? Like, like, is it supernatural or is it mental malady? Is this man losing his mind or is he actually hearing a heartbeat in the walls? Like all those things that, like, this film, and like I think there's like a wonderful kind of Shirley Jackson vibe going on here too, or
Oh,
like,
totally.
I mean, like, it's all there. It's a very literary film. Um, and, given the fact that they had like $1 million to shoot this movie, and given the fact that like they had one location, like the constraints, the kind of like the obstructions that made this film make it a better film, because there's no special effects. There's no garishness to it. It's all lean and methodical. Like like audio is the best special effect ever because you're just listening to it, and uh love it. I just love it. I love it so much that I'm
It
gonna steal from it.
Go for it, steal from it. If anyone is out there trying to like adapt Session 9 into a comic, or there's a novelization coming out, I think, but you're
Yeah.
not writing it.
No.
So Clay can write the Session 10 novel. Give him that. You mentioned it being it's a film built on constraints.
Hmm.
And so many of my favorite horror film, like my favorite horror film of all time, John Carpenter's Halloween, like that was here's
Yeah.
$300,000, go make a movie about a babysitter murderer. Um, and you go into the list goes on. Blair Witch Project is a great example, and this film. Are you someone, I know other authors do this sometimes. Are you someone who sets deliberate constraints for yourself when crafting a novel? Like it has to take place in this area and only this area. I can't cheat and do this narrative trick. Is that something you think about?
Um, yes, I do. I don't know if I would call it constraints though. Are you a Lars von Trier fan? Like, have you watched The Five Obstructions?
I have not.
Oh my God. It's like, say what you will about Lars von Trier, but I love the Five Obstructions, and I will wholeheartedly recommend it because it's a beautiful film. It's a documentary uh, about Lars von Trier and his film teacher, his film professor, and his film professor, you know, Lars von Trier, graduated from school, goes on to have the career that he has. He has achieved this kind of status as a auteur, and how he wields that power and that status is to go to his professor and say, I want you to make a movie 5 times, but each time there's gonna be a different obstruction. There's gonna be one thing that I'm gonna tell you you can't do, and uh, it's just in the movie the documentary is basically like the process that this poor old this old director is like kind of like, oh my God, this guy is like such a sadist. But it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So I'm losing my thread, but I'm going to call them obstructions, or I'm going to call them just like narrative. Are they constraints, or are they like narrative, like first person narrative is an obstruction because you are now relegating yourself to the point of view of one character. I love that. I at this point, it's not even a choice. It's just like I have to write in first person. If I am not writing in first person, that is a choice that I am making under duress. If I'm waking up and like, what am I going to write today? I'm going to write a story. Okay, here we go. First person. It's just like I just start like but it is the ultimate uh construct. It's the ultimate constraint because it's like you are hobble, like there's just no point of view other than what you're seeing out of your eyes. And I love that. I just love that. That's just like straight out of the gates. You're just like shooting yourself in the foot, but for all the right reasons, for all the best reasons, because it makes you resourceful. Like I've just slashed my budget by a gazillion dollars because I'm not third person. I'm not the omniscient, kind of like omnipotent, like all seeing God's eye. I'm just like some dude looking out into this and telling a story. That's the best. That's the best. Um, and then other constraints are more novel by novel. Like each book, I try to learn a lesson, and like sometimes I learn multiple lessons, but I'm like trying to understand like what is the world going to teach me about what I've done with this book. And it might not be a pleasant lesson, but like this is my takeaway. You put a book out there and the world tells you what it thinks. There's no true aggregate. There's no true like ultimate, like there'll never be the Rotten Tomatoes. This is the kind of synapse of this is the like the Uber consensus
Hmm.
of a book. God, I mean, maybe there is. I hope there's not. But like there's no Rotten Tomatoes for novels yet, not Goodreads, not Storygraph, but like there's no kind of like, and this is what we're gonna like culminate it all. Um, but like I try to like learn, like I want to know what people think of it so that I can take that understanding into the next book. Um, and the lessons I learned for like say, you mentioned Whisper Down the Lane, like people are like, oh, this is a good book, but it's not horror. And I was like, really? This isn't horror? Oh, that's a bummer. So like my response was like, well, I guess people want horror. Um, and so I wrote Ghost Eaters. And Ghost Eaters was like, I'm trying to be scary. Like I'm trying to like write something that has a supernatural element, like that it is like straight up these are ghosts, like that nobody's gonna read Ghost Eaters and be like, well, it's not. At least no one's saying it's not horror, you know? Like there are so many fucking ghosts in that book that it's like, well, you want horror? Well, here it is. I think the lesson I learned from Ghost Eaters was uh likable characters. Like people like to like their narratives, their narrators. And if they don't, they like push back on it. And I know this is going to sound bizarre, but like I actually genuinely, the lesson I thought I learned and was taking into What Kind of Mother, it's not an obstruction or a constraint, but it's like lesson. Like this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to try in the next book. And I swear to God, I tried to write a Radiohead. I tried to like write a breezy summer, uh, like like I kind of joke about it, but like it was supposed to be like like what if Nicholas Sparks wrote a horror novel? Um, but the not like weirdly enough, like that novel kind of like avalanched into what it was, almost without me. Um, and then I learned another lesson and another lesson. Like I'm just trying to learn so that I can kind of take that understanding to then say, well, this is what I want to do, or this is what I want to try with the next book, so that it's a pivot away. I don't want to repeat myself. I don't want to like, like I don't know how many times I am going to be able to step up to bat, and I feel so fucking lucky that I get the chance to do it, so that like every time it has to, if it's not like a home run, it just has to, I have to hit with flair. Like I just want to like, you know, hit someone in the audience, in the stands with the ball.
So is this way of thinking for you? It doesn't sound, I don't want to put words in your mouth. It doesn't sound like you're thinking about what the audience wants as much as you're thinking about how to stretch your own capabilities based on what the response was to the last book. Is that
Yeah.
the kind of thing?
Yeah. If everybody tells you, "Oh, I didn't like this book," or "This book is this," then I mean, like I'm very open about reading I just read. If it's out there and it's on the internet, I'm gonna just read. I'm gonna read my goddamn Goodreads reviews. Like it's masochistic. It's wrong, but I just do it. And like, you know, you can kind of intuit like what's a review that's based on like personal opinion versus kind of personal tastes versus like, you know, and but there's like something in there that you can actually mine if you're willing to look for it and sift through a lot of one stars. I sift through. I have so I'm not very on paper. My ratios look awful, but like I what I want to believe is that like I'm trying to do something different and new and push into uncharted territory. And I don't know if it remains to be seen like how well, but like I want to learn something, and I want to take that into the new book so that I can creatively grow, personally grow, as a human being grow, if not author.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that makes sense.
Just don't let me write about writers.
Not anymore. Not anymore. You got
Done.
you get a mulligan on Kill Your Darling, but no
That's
more.
it. That's it.
Um, Circling back to session 9, I wanted to ask, and I want to try to make this a regular thing on the show. Do you have a favorite scare from the movie? Is there one moment that you pick all the time as your favorite scary moment?
It's all about the audio recordings for me. Like the last 10 minutes, 15 minutes, where it's all just kind of ramping up. And there's that, you mentioned that one scene where the generator conks out because there's no gasoline in it. So Mike he has to leave the recordings behind so that he can fill the generator up with fuel so that he can come back and listen to it. But of course, what happens is he leaves the tape recorder on so that when he fills up the generator and the electricity comes back on, the recording starts up again without him. And that is the moment that Simon kind of enters the the scene, as it were. Is it the first time? I'm
Yeah.
blanking. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, which is amazing. There's no one there to listen to it. We, as the audience, are the only people there to kind of hear Simon, other than Gordon, presumably. And so everything from that moment on, it's just like like the the tension has just been ratcheting up, but like straight up through till the denouement. Like I love me some Simon. Like, yeah, the nyctophobia in the hallway is great with the lights going out.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
that's fun. Yeah, the lobotomy scenes and the like those are all like this movie doesn't need to jump scare me. This movie doesn't need, like, there are a few moments where it's like, woo, like, pigeons jumping out of the, fluttering out of the closet spaces, but like it just doesn't need that, because like so much of what this movie is like a sound, a recording seeping into your subconscious, so that when you leave the movie theater, you're hearing Simon like, "Hello, Matthew." It's just like
Yeah.
there's just something about that just like kills me, kills me. I love
It's
it.
in, it's incredible, and I want to. You've talked about the soundscapes in this movie, and the tapes are masterworks of horror. The way they built those tapes are great, but the sound design in just the overall environment of the asylum is wonderful too, and it leads me
Hmm.
to, like, my favorite scare in the movie is when Hank goes back at night and he's cleaning out that hole in the wall that he found full of coins, and he fills a duffel bag with all this stuff, and he's leaving, and he starts to hear noises around him.
Hmm.
And they could be anything, and there is a moment in there where a bird jumps out at him,
Hmm.
and these noises could just be anything because he's in a big old building in the middle of the night, and he's trying to tell himself that, and he keeps walking, and then he sees a figure in the dark, sort of in the distance behind these sort of caged hallways, and that freaks him out, and he runs more. But the movie resists giving you the quick payoff to that. And the
Yeah.
next, like, 30 seconds of the scene are him literally running into walls because it's nighttime and he doesn't know the environment and he's panicked.
Yeah.
And you hear over and over him running into these caged walls.
Yeah.
And then he hears the echoes of it behind him and he's not sure what he's hearing. And it is a wonderful sequence of suspense.
Yeah.
And the reason I know that it's my favorite scare in the movie is I watched this late last night. My wife and son were in bed, and I was the only one awake in the house. And I'm finished the movie. And full disclosure, I have an 18-month-old son, and the movie ends with a crying baby being murdered. So it's not the best state of mind to
Oh,
be
I'm
in.
so
But
sorry. I'm sorry I picked this movie.
no, it's fine. I did some other stuff to take my mind off of it before I went to bed, but I thought I was clean, right? I thought I had sort of distracted myself and I was ready. I was going to bed and relaxing. I'm walking down the hall that leads to our bedroom and I hear this metallic creaking sound,
Hmm.
and it legitimately freaked me out. I was playing detective, walking around the house like, what could have made that noise? What was that? It's not the
Hmm.
dryer. It's not the water heater. What is it? What is it? My wife couldn't sleep, so she got up to take a hot shower in the hope that it would relax her, and had pulled the shower curtain across the rod.
Oh my God.
That was the sound, and I could have walked into the bedroom and heard the shower going and known that that was the sound, but because of session 9, I was up playing a supernatural detective, getting ready to freak out and run into walls.
That's
Um,
amazing. Can I ask two questions?
yes.
Um, just while we're putting the audio recordings to bed, are you a Black Christmas fan? The original Black Christmas?
Oh, huge,
Yeah.
huge. Love it.
I I think those two movies do audio best, like audio terror, because like what's great about Black Christmas is that you have these prank calls, these phone calls, and the kind of the narrative, like you're watching this movie about sorority girls in peril, but like there's a whole other like micro narrative of like what Billy is talking about on the phone on these like lurid, lewd phone calls where he's like, Billy and Agnes, and what happened to the baby, Agnes? Like, and it's like none of that has anything to do with the movie, but it's like there for those who want to kind of pick it up and like in the much the same way that like I think session 9 with what is it? Mary and Peter, the brother, like there's like, you mentioned like the accident of like Peter pushing Mary and like her falling on the her porcelain doll and it's the head shattering and like slicing her up and like all of that stuff is just so and it's just buried like it doesn't it's like it's not overt like a movie with a gazillion-dollar budget would have some kind of intercut flashback scene where you would see those things happen like intermittent kind of like flashes of these vignettes but this movie just maybe it's because of budget but like they just didn't have that they didn't need it like it was all audio and I love that but yeah Black Christmas.
Black Christmas is incredible. If you, in the context of the film, the phone calls are creepy, but if you were to just like call someone who had never seen Black Christmas and play them those audio recordings of Billy and Agnes talking, absolute nightmare fuel. And
Yeah.
we're going, this year is 50 years since Black Christmas came out. It's still one of the
50.
scariest things. Yeah, 50,
Oh my
74.
God. That's wild. Um, you mentioned the Josh Lucas scene of him kind of like like running through the basement at night. And there's that scene, you mentioned the scene of like you see a figure kind of stepping out and he panics and runs. My question to you is I'm curious, do you think that that's Gordon or do you think it is a vestigial tale of the narrative thread that was completely excised from the movie itself?
I think based on like the sheer smallness of the figure that it could be the latter. And for those of you who don't know, there are about 9.5 minutes of deleted scenes on the Session 9 Blu-ray, and they're all committed to an alternate narrative that would have run through the film because the security guard mentions at the beginning of the movie that sometimes the patients come back because it's home for them and they don't know any better. And the deleted scenes are all little glimpses of this old woman who is clearly squatting in the building and has been there for a while. And, she could be someone that we're supposed to recognize from the building's history. She might not be. We're told Mary Hobbs is dead, so it doesn't seem like it's her, but it's this old woman who has a habit of collecting things. There's a scene where you see an attic room that is laid out with leaves and flowers and animal bones and all of these other things. And then it's revealed that she has been taking little items from the work crew. Like she has the bag of Doritos that they were eating from, and she has some gloves. And it's an interesting idea because it adds even more ambiguity to certain layers of the film because you sort of wonder, is she doing some of this or is she, and the alternate ending is she comes in and bludgeons Gordon with a flashlight. um I think it might be just a little moment that they took from that, and we can imply now that it's Gordon. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. What do you think about those deleted scenes?
I personally love them so much. I'm actually really mad that the movie cut them out.
It's
And
it's very, you know what it is? I read today that Brad Anderson based some of the thematic elements of this movie on Don't Look Now, and it's
hmm,
very Don't Look Now to have this elderly woman just sort of creeping around the fringes and then at the very end of the movie killing the main character. That's absolutely Don't Look Now. I'm
yeah,
sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, it's true. And I watched the deleted scenes. I've watched the deleted scenes twice. I remember when like it first came out on DVD and I rented it to watch it and I was like blown away that like, oh my God, there's this whole other layer that the movie just cuts out. And I've never listened to the audio commentary, so I have no I have no idea what the decision behind it was, and I'm sure there's a very sound one. But I I really am bummed because I do think that the narrative thread of a patient being there just enhances and enriches the ambiguity. It takes away a little bit of Simon, like the power of Simon,
Yeah.
because and maybe that is reason enough to cut it. But I think that like for a film that is already loosened, if not unraveled by its ambiguity, that like adding one more layer of like, well, maybe it's this. And what I love about the scenes with the woman is that she is in peril. She is terrified. She is in essence witnessing the kind of mental degradation of Gordon, and sees him murdering his entire crew,
Yeah.
which is the end. Like, you know, like the ultimate spoiler is that like he kills everybody. And what's, you know, and then she, in an act of desperation, out of panic, kills him, like bludgeons him with a flashlight. And, you know, and he's left to kind of bleed out. And like I don't know. I would have killed. Well, I would have died. I would have died for uh for that stuff to be in there. I want a director's cut. I want like that in there because I just want to see it play out. Um are you a Descent fan?
Oh yeah, love The Descent.
Did you see what was your first experience with the Descent? Was it the UK release or the American release?
It was the American release, and then I went back and watched the UK ending and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
I I was very fortunate. I got to see the UK first. I can't even imagine what it would be like to watch the American version. I like it just it's unfathomable to me. Like the movie is so much about that last scene that like what how could the movie exist without it? Like, you know, it's I mean it's like what, 5 seconds? 15 seconds? Like it's just not a lot, but like it is the linchpin of the movie. So I would just be like, it just seems sacrilege to me, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an odd for those of you who don't know, like The Descent. Well, we're not gonna spoil The Descent.
Yeah,
Go find the UK cut of The Descent.
yeah.
I'm sure someone else on this show will pick The Descent at some point, and I'll get to go watch Cave Diving with Monsters, courtesy of
Mhm.
Neil Marshall. But uh, yeah, I don't know how I feel about these deleted scenes. They're definitely interesting, but I do think what I want is, like you said, I want a director's cut where they get the full atmospheric treatment of being inserted back in where they would have gone, because there's really like it does add an extra layer of ambiguity because you wonder how much influence that this person has. And even in little things, there's this deleted moment where Gordon is sitting at the bottom of the stairs, and the moment that's in the movie is he sits down at the bottom of the stairs, looks at his fingernails, realizes he has blood on his fingernails, and he's like, how'd that get there? And he looks down at the ground and he sees a human footprint, like
Mhm.
a bare human footprint, which doesn't make any sense to him because none of them have been barefoot. Um, Little things like that are just a wonderful dose of weird atmosphere in this movie.
Yeah.
So I would love to see it all cut back together.
Uh, I yeah. Brad Anderson is such a really kind of interesting filmmaker. And I know there's got to be a reason. I don't want it to be studio interference. I want to believe that he made the decision for a sound reason. But like you get there's like this that weird kind of early aughts crop of like Lucky McKee, Brad Anderson, like the kind of like the new kids at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and you know, I don't think anybody short of like, I don't know, James Wan none of them like kind of rose to like the status of a Wes Craven or a John Carpenter. But like
Yeah.
Brad Anderson, like there was like a moment where like The Machinist, I thought his entry into Masters of Horror was great. Like he was like and I know he's like a TV director and he's doing a lot of episodic stuff. But like he didn't even like start with horror. Like horror was not his median, his lane until Session 9. And I don't know, it's so funny how, and I think this is what, you know, I'm going to make a thesis on the film that like when you have whatever your intentions are, whatever movie or book or whatever you set out to make, there's that. But there's the thing that you can't be held accountable for, or that no one's in control of. And that's what ultimately the thing is.
Yeah.
And I think Session 9 is a prime example of a piece of art transcending its creators. And that's not to knock Brad Anderson or any of the people kind of behind it. Like, I just think that the film is greater than the sum of its parts. That it has this kind of like elevation to it, not elevated horror, but like there's like something that like lifts beyond what it is. And, you know, maybe that's because of the people who watched it and what they're bringing to it. Like, I'm clearly a fan. But like, I do think that there is something to be said about when you set out to make something and you kind of make it, but the thing ends up being even better. It's something greater than what you set out to do. And I don't know how you do that, but I want to do that. I want to one day, just one day, one thing, one book, please.
Well, I think that is as close as we're going to get to a good explanation for why this movie is one of the best horror films of this century so far. Again, if you have not seen Session 9 and you're not turned off by us spoiling most of the film, which you shouldn't be because we've talked about all this ambiguity, you want to go figure out the ambiguity, right? So go watch it. Before I let you go, Clay, will you let everyone know what you have coming up and where they can find you online?
Yeah. I have this new novel, Kill Your Darling, that comes out in a couple weeks. The Seance in the Asylum from Dark Horse comes out. Kill Your Darling is with Bad Hand Books, September 24th. Seance in the Asylum, otherwise known as AKA Session 10. That comes out in October from Dark Horse. And then a little bit later down the road, I've got a new novel coming out called Wake Up and Open Your Eyes with Quirk Books, and that's January 7th.
I think we may have to have you back in December and we can talk about Black Christmas and Wake Up and Open Your Eyes at the same time, because
amazing.
Let me tell you, Black Christmas is one of those films I could talk about forever.
You're on. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Clay McLeod Chapman, we are honored to have you as the first guest for The Scares That Shaped Us, and we really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Please tune in for future episodes with people who are far more coherent and cogent than I am. But thank you for letting me break the seal.
Thanks once again to Clay McLeod Chapman for being the very first guest on The Scares That Shaped Us. You can get his novelette Stay on the Line right now from Shortwave Publishing, and his novella Kill Your Darling is out September 24th from Bad Hand Books. And if you want to learn more about our show and the things we've got going on, you can go to thescaresthatshapedus.com. That's where you'll find episodes, news, links to our socials, ways to get in touch, everything you need to know as we move forward into our second, third, fourth, fifth, hopefully 200th episode someday. So go check that out. And lastly, if you like the show, and again, I really hope you did if you've listened this far, tell your friends. Review it, rate it on your podcast app as it hits your favorite podcast app, and help us spread the word about this thing we're doing over here. We've got some really exciting guests coming up in the next few weeks to talk about some great stories, and we're going to have a lot of fun. So I hope you stick around. Until next time, I'm Matthew Jackson, and you've been listening to The Scares That Shaped Us.